Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our third in the fall series of OTF Connects for 2016 and 2017. Welcome to our teachers who are here from right across the province of Ontario, and a really warm welcome to Garfield Junie Newman, who we are thrilled is continuing to be a facilitator for our OTF Connects workshops. As you can see, Garfield is busy with OISE and the Critical Thinking Consortium, but is never too busy to come and join a group of teachers, and I think he was with students today in a school talking about critical thinking and emphasizing how important it is to all of us in our education. So Garfield, a really warm welcome. I'm going to turn off my mic now and let you take over.
Great, thanks Susan. Good evening everyone. I'm looking forward to some dialogue and some exploring and issues of inquiry and what it might mean to us and what it looks like in our classrooms and how we get it to work well for students. Just early on, just make sure my mic's okay. If anyone can't hear any feedback, let me know. Otherwise, I'm going to assume you hear me and keep rolling along. So just to start us off this evening, we're going to explore. In the Critical Thinking Consortium, we use this term C3 inquiry, and it's to signal or to indicate what we call dimensions in thinking. That there are three dimensions to good inquiry, which we're going to touch on. There's a critical dimension, by which I would suggest that it's reactive in nature and we're responding to issues. There's a creative element of inquiry, which is more imaginative and more generative of new ideas. And then there's a collaborative element of inquiry, that the richest, deepest inquiry happens when we put our heads together, we collaborate in the exploration of ideas. So we use this term C3 inquiry, critical, creative, and collaborative inquiry or thinking in our class. And I just wanted to share, this is just something, and I'm going to have you try this out a little bit, and maybe we'll use the chat window, or you can type right into this, and Susan can jump back on and remind you if you need. I use this to help plan learning around critical inquiry, and the way it works is in column one, what's the topic? So, you know, if I would ask you, what's coming up this week that you need to prepare a lesson for, what's coming up in the next month or something, and typically we go to our curriculum, and the first thing that usually comes to our mind is a topic for exploration. So I want to just try this. If someone could throw a topic either in the chat box, or right on the screen, and we'll just try this out, and I'm going to kind of think about it in your own context. So tell me something coming up in the next week or so that you're going to be teaching, and ideally make it something you haven't really planned yet, and maybe we can come up with an idea. Okay, great. Thanks so much. So let's take a few. So we've got immigration and refugee policy in Canada. Just for clarification, is that in the context of a grade 10 history course, a grade 9 geography course, civics course? Just give me a bit of context so I know where to go. Charter of Rights and Freedoms in a law class. Great. Grade 9 geography. Wonderful. Okay, and Charter of Rights and Freedoms, would that be a grade 11 law class? So just while I'm waiting for that, let me just, so what you've given me is a topic, grade 12, thank you. So we'll start with the immigration and refugee. That's a topic that we want to look at. And, you know, column 2, we think about, you know, the big concepts, ideas, like what is it I want students to take away aside from the issue we're looking at. But my question now becomes, in column 3, and I call it 3A, how do we tweak that so we problematize it? So immigration and refugee policy is a topic, and kids can read about it, I can talk about it, but how do we make it an issue for them to explore and debate, and ultimately have to make some kind of thoughtful decision or judgment? So for example, and if you have some ideas, throw them up in the chat window, I'll throw a few out. We might look at, does Canada have a fair and just immigration and refugee policy? So that might be the way I move it from, we're going to study our immigration policy and what it is and what it says, to a judgment. Is Canada's immigration and refugee policy fair and just? So that would be one. Or another might be, does Canada's immigration policy adequately balance the needs of Canada, Canadian society, and our global responsibility to others, something like that. So depending on my class, I'm going to tweak this so it becomes an issue. So let me just see if we can't capture a sample. See, does that work? Just bear with me. Okay, so just as a sample there, we might tweak it so it becomes an issue more than not just a topic. Or Canada's Charter of Rights and Freedoms. How do we try this out? Can you see? So if we put here Canada's Charter of Rights and Freedoms, how do we turn it into an issue? What would be the question we might ask students that would require them to make a thoughtful decision? See if anyone has a thought. Well, I mean, the obvious one, I think, for Canada's Charter of Rights and Freedoms is to use case study approach and have students look at what does it fit under. Interesting one that I thought came up today that I just heard about this morning on the news and followed with interest was a Douglas Cardinal, a Native activist and architect, challenging whether or not the Cleveland Indians should be allowed to use the name and logo while in Ontario, citing it as a human rights violation. And I'm wondering, if you put that up against as a Charter of Rights, where does it fit? Now, it's an interesting dilemma because it's a team from the U.S. coming into Canada. But if you look at challenges such as that, do they fit within? Now, let me just continue to move across. So we take a topic like immigration, and we tweak it so it becomes a decision or a judgment. So my next step now is I have to figure out, well, what criteria would I use? I've asked, is Canada's immigration system, immigration and refugee policy, fair and just? So now I have to determine my criteria for a fair and just policy. So what does that look like? What criteria might we use to indicate something is a fair and just society? So for example, it's designed, let's say a fair and just immigration policy serves the interests of Canadian society, so I'm just trying to contributes to building an inclusive society, and perhaps supports Canada's global obligations as a global country, something like that. So you get the idea that as students are going to deliberate, and you're going to see this come up a bit later, as students begin to deliberate around this question and they gather evidence, they're using the criteria to help them make a decision. Now what I want to show you is as we move from this, so I just have to shrink this now a little bit. Just move it even. So my next step would be to ask myself, so as students weigh in on this issue, as they think about this issue, how will I have them show their learning? Well, how will they do to demonstrate? So this is, it's in the next column, 4A. What will students do or create or communicate? How will they communicate their response to the issue? Now, it may not always be that in every question I ask, the students have to produce something, but in many cases, I may want them to write a persuasive paragraph, to participate in in-class debate, and so on and so forth. So let's say here that the students are to draft a letter to the federal government, either praising Canada's immigration and refugee policy as a gold standard for the world, or encouraging the government to make revisions so that we have it better. So if students research and decide our policy meets all the criteria, it's an excellent policy, then they could write a letter praising our policy and letting the government know they support it. Or they could say, although it has strengths, I recommend certain things. So let's say, column 4A, write a letter to the federal government, either praising or making recommendations for revisions to our immigration policy. Now, my next column, 4B, so what's your criteria for a well-written letter? So notice my first set of criteria, the first set of criteria I'm working with are how do I make a decision about the issue we want to grapple with, in this case, immigration policy, and my second set of criteria around the product of performance. So how do we make sure kids know how to write a persuasive paragraph, a thoughtful letter, create an engaging poster, whatever it might be. So I just wanted to show you this as a way to kind of help us think through, and I'm going to just pause for a moment and ask you, you don't have to share it, but just think about, because as we work through, we're going to loop back to this a few times. If you do want to post for others to see, that would be great, but if not, it's just going to take 2 minutes and ask you to think of a topic that you'll be teaching that we can work through this evening as an inquiry. So as I said, you don't have to post it. If you do, it'll allow me to be thinking about it and throw some suggestions as we work through. So about 2 minutes, I'm going to turn my mic back on. But for now, it's going to give you a couple of minutes, and you can either add, help populate this, or jot more ideas in the chat window of topics coming up that we might try to tweak for a critical thinking or critical inquiry, and as we work through the evening. Okay, so I'll be back in 2. All right, I'm going to jump back in. Hopefully you had some time just to give some thought to a topic, something coming up that might fit in, and as we work through, just keep this in mind as we go. So I want to just make sure that we have a common understanding of what we mean by critical thinking. What does it mean to think critically? And we're going to link that to inquiry shortly. So, but to start off, I want to give you this image. So this is the Gibraltar Airport, and I just want someone to, in the chat window, what's the issue with the airport? So I first saw this used at a conference on brain research and technology, and the person used it as an example of what happens with poor planning. So why is this considered poor planning? Great. It runs through a city street. In fact, it runs through the only major streets in Gibraltar. And you will notice that when the plane takes off or lands, you can see the pedestrians who have stopped to wait and the cars that have stopped to wait, and then it takes off. So, and by the way, if you were to Google Gibraltar Airport, just throw it into Google, you'll probably find many of the top hits will be something around why the Gibraltar Airport is one of the world's top worst airports, the top most frightening airports. It's the kind of butt of jokes for this poorly planned airport. And yet, I wonder, and so you'll see I want to pose this question, is it actually poor planning or is it an innovative business solution? And to answer this, I just want to tell you, I was on a flight from, I think, northern Alberta, and I had a grade 12 student sitting beside me, and he happened to look over my shoulder and saw what I was typing this question, is it an innovative solution or not? And he said, oh, definitely, this is definitely poor planning. I said, are you sure? He said, oh yeah, definitely poor planning. And I said, well, what do you know about Gibraltar? He said, not much. I said, well, what if I told you a bit more about Gibraltar? So I wanted to show you from an inquiry, getting kids to start to think about, here's a few things you might need to know. The picture on the right, this is Gibraltar from the tip at the bottom. And if you look up in the bay, kind of in the top left, you see the runway jutting out, and then the second piece jutting out just above that. That's the border with Spain. And until about 20 years ago, the Spanish didn't let you cross into Gibraltar, and so the British needed a way in. And then I point out to the student, the other thing you might want to think about is this thing called the Rock of Gibraltar that sits there in the middle. And somewhere on this piece of land, you want a runway to get planes in and out. Just avoid that huge rock. So what would you do? One other piece of information that might be helpful is how many flights are there each day in and out of Gibraltar. And this is, you can see from June 17th of this year, the total number of flights in and out of Gibraltar in a given day. So given how busy or not busy it is, given the restrictions, here's some options to consider. You could tunnel underneath. You could build a runway out on the water. You could build a bridge for cars. You could negotiate with Spain. Which of those, when you think about each of those, how much would they cost? And so what we come back to is a set of criteria. As I was just mentioning, critical thinking, using criteria. So which of those might be the best idea to be least disruptive to the environment, most cost efficient, meet the needs and wants of users, and be the most novel or valuable idea? And it may, in fact, in the end, be to leave it alone. That might be the one that best meets my criteria. So what I'm showing you in this is we can have kids just find something on the internet, hear something, read something in a text, and not question it, or we can use a critical inquiry approach to, and the term we use is to problematize it so that students have to think a little more deeply as they gather evidence. So just going to shift a little bit on this, and what I want you to look at on this slide here is an article I found interesting by Daniel Willingham called 21st Century Skills, Not New but a Worthy Challenge. And first of all, I think the title itself says a lot. That many of the things that we tout as 21st century, critical thinking, creativity, innovation, risk-taking, for anyone who's been around education for a while, we would say that's really not new to the 21st century. That's been the goal of educators. In fact, I had some students in a grad class last week talking about new competencies for the 21st century. And I pointed out to them that critical thinking as a core competency of learning has been in curriculum documents going back over 100 years. That we have had critical thinking in document after document. We just haven't really figured out how to do it. Notice what Willingham says, and there's a co-author, Andrew Rotherham, that it's not really that new, but what is new is the need to be more deliberate about how we engage in a teaching of critical thinking, collaboration, problem solving, that it's more important than ever we get it right. So I'm going to pause, and I want to get your response to this. I want you to read my statement, and then in the chat window, or if you'd rather jump on the mic, I'll turn mine off. I'd like you to get some comments. Do you agree or disagree with the statement on the screen? Read the statement and give me a response. You can moderately disagree, moderately agree, vehemently disagree. I'm just give you a minute to turn my mic off, and I want to see some responses to the statement.
Don't be shy, people. I'll tell you once again that the talk button up in the top left, just touch it once, and maybe it's easier than typing. I see some comments coming as well, so either way.
And Donna, thank you for starting off, and Lorena, I see. So can you add a little more to your statement as well to tell me why you believe it's valid? Just a line or two, or jump on the mic and just give me a comment on is there anything that makes you uncomfortable in the statement, or why do you think it's valid, and why do you agree? Great. Thanks so much, and I'm just going to start to jump in on some of the comments and keep adding them. This is wonderful. I'm really glad to see that, as some of you have picked up on, and I want to be clear on this, the statement, and we start off with kids can Google most content. So, if we think content delivery is our main job in education these days, we could quickly find ourselves out of work because we can be replaced by the Khan Academy, or we can be replaced by lots of other things. That's what's easy to replace. But I do want to just pause for a moment and have you note that my contention here is not simply that content is not the primary goal, but notice that I do say it is a necessary intellectual tool for solving problems. That in the absence of any background knowledge or content or context, kids are going to struggle with the thinking that we want. And I saw many of you making references to the content being a conduit to deeper thinking or deeper knowledge and understanding. So I am using this statement to both say teaching content is not enough, but at the same time to say it is absolutely necessary that as high school teachers we teach content. That I think it is important that we not lose sight that kids do not think that critical thinking means they don't really have to worry about content, because you can't think in a vacuum. You can't think about nothing. So I wanted to pick up on this just for a moment and follow up with two more. Let's start with the top. I'll give you a little bit of context, and now that we've got you typing, I'm hoping you'll continue to jump in and add or jump onto the mic. The top statement is something I saw on Twitter maybe 6 months ago, and someone sent this tweet. A teacher's job is to inspire students and then get out of their way. So I just want to pause on that one for a moment. Agree or disagree? And anyone have any, do you love that? Does it make you a little nervous? Does red flags go off for anyone? How do you respond to that notion? A teacher's job is to inspire students and get out of their way. Thank you. I'm seeing some comments about that there is a time to answer questions. I like Lauren's statement. Sometimes we have to steer, that it's not merely getting out of their way. Okay, I like that. So inspire, yes, like the first part of the statement, but then as a coach, we have to do more, not just to inspire, but to guide them through the process. Okay, let me flip this for a moment. The bottom statement came last spring. I was out visiting my students in their practice teaching block, and one of my students, who's a very good student, very thoughtful, excellent student in my class, was teaching a lesson on the end of World War II. He had a wonderfully created PowerPoint. It had lots of good information, beautifully set up, really nice work on developing the PowerPoint. And for 75 minutes, he went through the PowerPoint, and at no point were kids invited to turn and talk to each other. No point were they invited to consider a provocative question or use the information on that PowerPoint to answer a question. So in our debrief, I said to him, you know, I was a little disappointed in the lesson, very well researched and very well organized, but there was no invitation for kids to think. And what you see on the screen is his response to me, that he said, this is what my associate teacher has told me several times. Sometimes you just have to teach content. You can't do critical thinking in every lesson. Is he right? I want you to, again, is he right that some days we just have to teach content? We can't put critical thinking in every lesson. So you just take a minute and respond to that. Is he right? You can't do critical thinking in every lesson. Okay, so I'm Pauline, an interesting question. I'm going to make a comment to answer yours in a moment. And Farron, I love how boring. I have to tell you, when I've shared this comment with elementary teachers, they tell me, certainly in the primary grades, you wouldn't last very long in a primary grade if you had that attitude. And it struck me that the higher we go in education, the more likely that bottom statement is to be true. Until you get to university, where in first year university, it's probably 3 hours of lectures of delivery of content. But let me just give you a little more context for the lesson. The student, interestingly, so I'm just looking at some of the other comments. The student, interestingly, on each slide, as I told you, very well researched and very well put together. On each slide, there'd be 4 or 5 points, and he would highlight 1 point on each slide in yellow to let students know that was the important point they should make sure was in their notes. By the way, these are grade 10 academic kids, and on each slide, he had highlighted the 1 point that was important for them to make sure they record in their notes. And it just struck me, well, that's your critical thinking opportunity right there. Why are you spoon-feeding grade 10 academic kids and then saying to me you can't do critical thinking in every lesson? And what it suggested to me is a misunderstanding that critical thinking has to be a big project. It has to be something substantial, when in fact I can embed thinking in every lesson by having kids do something as simple as, here are 4 points, I don't want you to write more than 2 down. Make sure that you turn to a partner and figure out which 2 are worth recording, which will help us answer the question. So notice that this notion that we can't do critical thinking all the time, sure you can. What would be an appropriate title for this slide? Which of the 2 are the most important facts? Here are three causes of something. Put them in order of what you think might be the third most important factor, and so on. So what I want to do is kind of, both of these trouble me, to be honest with you. The top one I didn't comment quite on. I think it's absolutely teachers' job to inspire kids, but getting out of the way, my daughter could stay at home then. She doesn't need to go to school because she can get inspired by something she saw on TV, something she saw online. And if we're just going to get out of their way, why doesn't she just sit at home? I would find it hard to justify a teacher's salary if all we're doing is get kids excited and get out of their way. In fact, I'm going to say to you, I find this an assault on the important role that teachers play in education. To diminish it, to inspire kids and let them just do it themselves. It almost feels like we're trying to undermine the important role that teachers play. So just to back that up a little bit, what you see on the screen now, in about, I think, June, John Hattie released, if you know John Hattie's work on visible learning, and he talks about strategies that are making an impact. And he released this poster. And this poster you see has the top 6 effects and why they work, things that are working, making a difference for kids, and the top 6 bottom effects that are not working. And when you look at on the right, the blue is having a big impact. The divider, 0.4, so when you look at the effect size on learning, 0.4 and above is where we're making a difference for kids. And under 0.4, we're really not making a difference for kids learning. So I want you to notice this notion that kids should be in control of their own learning. And I'm raising this, I'll come back in a moment. Student control over their own learning scored a 0.04. It's one of the smallest, almost negative impacts in teaching, telling kids that they can learn what they want to learn. Whereas self-reported grades, kids having an understanding of how they're doing, being able to monitor their own progress, comes in at a 1.44. That's one of the highest. I'm raising this because we're here to talk tonight about infusing a spirit of inquiry, and I want us to think a little bit, what do we mean by inquiry? And in some places, inquiry is seen to mean discovery, that kids ask the questions they want to ask, and they explore the topics they want to cover, that they are in control of their learning. And I want to show you this because there's very little research to support that makes a significant difference. That kids often don't know what they don't know. They don't know what to explore. And by the way, we have a curriculum that we are legally obligated to teach. So this kind of approach to inquiry that just says study what you want. And I love it, challenge, question, support, applause, thumbs down, keep the comments coming as we work through. I want to show you, this is a bit of a Twitter battle I got in, although someone said to me the other day, well, you were doing most of the launches, and I guess that's true. The image in the center is a tweet that I saw that I took issue with. And you can see that it reads, are we really looking for engagement? Shouldn't it be empowerment? So if you start on the top right, my response to this poster is, why do we need to pit empowerment against engagement? I wasn't sure why we feel the need sometimes to make it a choice between one or the other. So I questioned, don't we want both engaged and empowered students? The response I got to that tweet was on the left. It said, I think one difference between engagement and empowerment lies in whose ideas students are thinking about. So I had to respond to that by saying, not really. That's a misunderstanding of engagement. Engagement comes from the French word to commit to. In other words, being engaged or engagement is to freely commit. It's getting kids to commit to wanting to learn. And I argue here that we need engaged learners and we need engaged citizens. And then I went on. That engaging kids is framing learning in a way that inspires awe and wonder. It helps kids get excited about learning. Empowering learners isn't getting out of their way, it's helping them become proficient users of intellectual and digital tools. And then my last 2 points, if we want to support risk-taking, innovation, entrepreneurship, and so on, we have to understand you cannot innovate in a field you know nothing about. Kids need to know some content. And our job is to help them make sure they acquire the background knowledge so that they can engage in meaningful inquiry. And my last point was, but building background knowledge does not need to mean transmission. So our real challenge, how do we build background through a thinking approach? Now, I threw a lot there. Thoughts, applause, thumbs down, what do you think? And let me just say one other piece in this. I'm responding this way because I'm concerned about inquiry. I'm often seeing that inquiry has to be the kids generating the questions. That inquiry seems to have legitimacy only if the kids are the ones who generate the questions. And I want to challenge that by saying, in fact, I think good teachers excite kids to learn about things that kids never knew about. That when I think in my life, I've had many good teachers in my life who inspired me to want to learn more about something that I previously knew nothing about. That had I stuck only to what I'm interested in, I would have had a very limited scope of what I explored in life. But good teachers excited me to want to travel places, to read authors, to learn about stuff that I didn't even know about. So I want to suggest that not only are good teachers important to inspire kids and excite kids, but we also build the tools and we teach content to help kids think deeply about issues. So that's my position on inquiry that I'm going to be taking tonight, that my job is to help frame questions that excite kids, help them see relevance, make sure they have enough background knowledge to engage in the inquiry, and give them the tools to think deeply. So I'm going to pause there because it's kind of an important piece to make sure that everyone's comfortable or have some questions that we clarify. So I'm just going to turn off my mic again just for a minute, maybe a minute and a half. I'd love to see some reactions to or thoughts about this. Okay. By the way, Donna, thank you for that. Engage, empower, nurture, innovate. That really works very well for me. And I like the way you brought 4 pieces together as opposed to this notion that we have to pick one or the other. But I think you're right. Nice mandate, nicely put. I'll keep watching for comments. I want to start shifting into, yeah, but how do we do it in the context? And as you see, oh, great. Thanks, Pauline. I'm just sorry, reading the comment. I get distracted. Inquiry is a stance. So what I want to suggest as we look into this, rather than seeing inquiry necessarily as an approach, so sometimes you'll have people talk about inquiry-based learning as distinct from project-based learning, as distinct from other approaches. I want to suggest to you that the inquiry is best seen as a stance instead, that it's that kids wonder and they ask questions and so on, and that we help them to explore the issues. And used well, inquiry can enhance multiple approaches: problem-based learning, project-based learning, case studies, discovery learning. I saw someone mention before even direct instruction. Direct instruction can still have an element of inquiry in it. So it's how we approach it. And we'll move into the concrete. I've been playing with this notion of a baloney meter. And this is just a way to set it up, and I want to leave you with a number of practical strategies tonight. So I wanted to show you this. That I've been creating this baloney meter, and let me give you a bit of a context. So in my social studies class last year, towards the end of the year, and I'm going to ask you to vote on this, so I'll ask Susan to set this up. Essentially, I asked my students, should we use Pocahontas in grade 5 social studies, where students are looking at First Nations cultures and history, pre-contact. Should we use, pre-contact and around the contact period? I want you to vote with a check or an X. Should we use Pocahontas with grade 5 students to have them look at First Nations culture? So your response that's building here, yes, sorry, Pauline, I do mean the Disney version. I do mean the Disney version, and your response is consistent with my students. They pretty uniformly thought, no, we should not be using Pocahontas. And I'm sure if I asked you in your time, why not? Well, it's not accurate. It presents stereotypes. It may even have racist portrayals and so on. So there are these issues, and I absolutely agree. But notice, what if I said, and let me show you why I'm going to disagree with that. What if I showed students the first 10 minutes of Pocahontas, and then I asked them to place it on my baloney meter? By the way, when I asked teachers in the elementary panel, if you showed your class the first 10 minutes of Pocahontas with no other teaching, not at the end, but at the very beginning of a unit, where would they place it on my baloney meter? Would they say there's no baloney, it's accurate? Would they say it's mostly accurate, but there's a bit that's wrong, maybe a little baloney? There's some baloney, there's a lot of baloney, or it's full of baloney. Where would kids place this? And pretty uniformly, teachers tell me somewhere around no baloney to a little baloney. That for the most part, kids would see it as truthful. And I want you to think, no, so we choose not to show it in class because we've made the decision that it's flawed. So we've made the decision that this movie has problems, and therefore we decide not to show it. And what that leaves us with is showing movies that we've already deemed to be correct or accurate, and kids believing that anything teachers choose to show must be accurate because teachers chose it. So notice what we're doing is we're setting up a place where kids don't really have to inquire themselves, because the teacher will filter. The teacher will assign readings that are true. They'll assign films that are true. Well, I want to say to kids, I'm going to show you films that you're going to have to decide. As we have elders visit our class, read Indigenous literature, learn more about Indigenous culture, I'm going to go back to my baloney meter and ask, does anybody think we should slide our scale further along the line? Did you find more bits of evidence that does not support? Notice what I've done is I'm problematizing it rather than assuming that I should make the decision. So I want you to think about that, because the way that we can put inquiry, the textbook, how well does your textbook get? Is your textbook accurate? Flip through, put it on a baloney meter from, no, I think this textbook was written by, some pretty smart people, and I assume the school wouldn't buy it if it was wrong, so I think it sits over on the left. Well, let's watch and see whose voices are missing or how it's portrayed. And by the way, I'm perfectly okay if 3 weeks later we end up at little or no baloney and we're impressed by the text, but at least we've done a thoughtful analysis. Or maybe we start to slide down the scale as we explore it. Now, I'm going to show you another example. This is more my high school version. By the way, I do want to tell you, I was working with schools in Dubai in the summer, and I didn't use Pocahontas. I used Aladdin, and shortcut from Aladdin. Should we use Aladdin? And we're looking at Middle Eastern cultures. Similar reaction. No, it's filled with inaccuracies and so on. The problem is that I hadn't anticipated, and I should have. It was just silliness on my part. Is I used a baloney meter in a Muslim country, and several people came up to me after. They enjoyed the presentation, but they said, "But I don't know what baloney is." And as I thought about it, I thought, of course not, because pork isn't consumed in Muslim countries. So I need a new term for my baloney meter. If you have a suggestion, let me know what you would use. But let me show you my high school version. I call it my crap detector. See, I think kids should always have a crap detector in place. So when you are given something, instead of watching a movie and assuming it to be true and filling in a worksheet, because too often I find we show movies and we give kids worksheets to fill in. And what we should be doing is saying, how accurate is this film? Do you think it's completely true? It seems reasonable. I think there's lots of bits that seem fairly solid. Some aspects are lacking in truth or veracity. I'm seeing some red flags. This whole thing smells kind of funky. This smells like total crap. Set your dial. And by the way, again, I'm going to have kids go through a textbook, watch a movie at the beginning. I want you to set the dial. And as we learn, you can adjust your dial. Like, wait a minute, that doesn't fit. And they start to dial it. So notice what I'm doing is I'm inviting thinking or speculation right off the bat. I'm not front-end loading content. I'm asking kids, thanks, Susan, for putting that out. So many movies with no opportunity to think. Often we give worksheets to be filled in. And by the way, notice what that does is it reinforces this movie is true, and your job is to pull out information to fill in the worksheet, as opposed to question whether or not, in fact, it's valid. Much more thinking if we probe kids. Just wanted to show you. Oh, sorry. I think Susan, did we have a link for this one? Okay, just take it's about 2 minutes and watch the YouTube clip that Susan's posted. And I also turn the mic off. It should take about 2 minutes. And when it's done, join us back on here. I want to talk about it.
Sorry, I didn't mention this in the intro. When we watch videos, I will put the links in the chat, and you click on that link and it'll open it in your own browser, and that works out a lot better than us trying to watch it all together through Blackboard.
So I think you spaghetti tree in your backyard, but you have to carefully prune it over the years to get the uniform length, keep in mind. So by the way, I want you to know I showed that to a grade 8 class in Ottawa, and 19 out of 20 students thought it was real. Why might students buy into that, even at a grade 8 level? Why might they? By the way, it wasn't a large Italian population, but why would kids maybe believe that? Yeah, format. So you see it as a documentary, and it seemed to be true. Okay, so the format. That's a boring videos educators pull out. BBC, so the source is reliable. By the way, did the British accent? You have the narrator's voice. They just sound authoritative. That British voice. Black and white. Yeah, so it looks like old historical film. By the way, I don't know if you noticed some of the classic kind of propaganda techniques being used in there. Well, of course, you've all seen examples, and so I don't want to be the one who hasn't seen it. And they explain to you how certain things, like how is it the spaghetti grows at such uniform lengths, and they explain it and so on. So I wanted to show you that. But see, what I want to do is, instead of presenting things, this is an extreme example, but it's a bit fun. I want kids just to wonder, as you watch something, as you watch a TV, as you watch the news, as you watch Donald Trump, how much truth do you think's in here? Now, let's go check it. So it's not just set the dial, but as we learn, as we explore, as we gather new evidence, we're assessing the credibility. Notice the key here is that kids set the dial, but then they adjust the dial as their learning unfolds. So what I want to do is continue to explore this idea of a thinking classroom. And we call it a thinking classroom where kids learn to think and think to learn. That saying is that we know the most powerful learning happens when kids are themselves actively engaged in thinking about the topic, but we have to teach them how to think about the topic. We have to teach them the intellectual tools that will do that. And I mentioned at the outset this idea of 3 dimensions of thinking. So I'm just this is just a recap for some of you who may have been to work on our work on critical thinking, or this is from our book on creating thinking classrooms, that we work on what we see as 4 key fronts if we're going to create this thinking classroom and make inquiry powerful in classrooms. Have we shaped the climate that supports the thinking we want? So are kids expected to provide evidence to support their answer? Are we making sure that we're inviting multiple answers to questions and not looking for one correct answer? Are we making sure multiple voices are heard? So are we creating the environment where kids are willing and encouraged to think? The second one is, how are we framing our questions? Earlier I said, that the teacher's job is to frame questions and invite kids to think. So how am I going to tweak my question so that it moves at the very beginning? I asked you to give me a topic. You gave me a topic, immigration, and refugee policy topic. I try to create the opportunity for thinking by tweaking it to becoming, do we have a fair and just immigration and refugee policy? So I don't want you just to learn about and take notes. I want you to be thoughtful and make a decision. The next piece, 5 intellectual tools. If I'm going to give kids these questions that require greater thinking, then I also have to support them with the tools they need to do that thinking. So notice the first one we touched on at the beginning, background knowledge. If you know nothing about our immigration policy, how could you make a thoughtful decision? You'll just get drawn into other people's views. So what do we do to read about, discuss, or learn about, so we build your background on our immigration policy or refugee policy? I showed you we think about the criteria, that a fair and just policy should meet this set of criteria. We get kids thinking about that. Make sure that there's no vocabulary within what we call thinking vocabulary. For example, what can be inferred from if I don't know what an inference is, or I want you to assess someone's position. Do I know what that means? Can I give you thinking strategies? I'm going to show you those in a moment. And the habits of mind. Pay attention to detail, show empathy, and so on. And all of those tools we want to use as a vehicle to provide guidance. So that's just kind of a broad overview. So just again, a little bit of review on thinking critically, and then I want to shift to some of the how we get there from an inquiry lens. Keep in mind that for critical thinking to be occurring, for critical thinking to happen, there has to be an invitation for students to assess or judge. So at the core of all critical thinking is using criteria to help students make thoughtful decisions. So core to critical thinking, that we've invited kids to make some kind of judgment or assessment using some criteria to guide them. Okay. And so in a traditional approach, we tend to teach answers, and students try to remember them so they can feed them back when called upon. Okay. So traditional classrooms, we teach answers, and students try to remember them, so when they're tested, they can recall the answer. In the critical thinking and inquiry approach, the student's job is to figure out a reasonable answer. It's not my job. Your job is to figure out the answer. But my job is to help you build the tools that you need to arrive at that answer. Okay, so we just talked about those tools, but note the shift. In an inquiry, in a critical inquiry classroom, students have to develop the answer, but I still have to help them build the tools to do it. So this is what we typically use, and some of you will have seen this before. My apologies for repetition, but I think some haven't. If you look at column 1, what we call type 1 questions, what do you notice about all those questions? If I can just get you to type that in the chat window there. What do you notice with someone, what do you notice with all the type 1 questions? Great. Single answer, recall, fact-based. We call them retrieval questions. Someone mentioned earlier many of the content things we talk about in classes. You can Google them. These are the kind of questions that I could look up. They might be in my notes. Maybe it's in my memory. I just remember from yesterday. So they're recall or retrieval questions. What about when you go to type 2? What about column 2 questions? How does type 2 differ from type 1? Okay, it's an opinion. By the way, you'll notice in type 1, there's typically, someone said there's a single answer. We call them a closed question. In type 2, there are no wrong answers. So they're completely open. They're based on, don't get many answers, in fact, endless answers. It's as many choices as there are, those are the answers. It's based on my opinion or how I feel about something, so I can't be wrong. Okay? So notice type 1, there is no decision to be made. Type 2, there is a decision, but it's made from my gut. It doesn't take reasoned judgment. Type 2 questions are just inviting me to say how I feel about something. Now, when we move to type 3, you'll notice that type 3 questions are also open, and they require a decision, but it's not just from my gut. So type 1, we have a single answer. Type 3, we would have more reasonable answers. But we wouldn't have as many reasonable answers in 3 as we would in 2. So key thing here, type 3 questions are asking kids to make a thoughtful decision using evidence and criteria to decide. So as we look earlier when I said to you, mini type 1, when I ask you what's the topic coming up, that's type 1. But when I tweak it for critical thinking, that's a type 3, where there's criteria used and there's evidence to support that answer. And so when we look at framing these types of questions, these are the 4 attributes that we need to be thoughtful about. It needs to generate a variety of options. Critical thinking is adjudicating among options. So students have a variety of options from, Pocahontas is, notice I set up as a baloney meter from no baloney to full of baloney, and there was a range of options for students to consider. Same with the crap detector. Any critical thinking question has a range of possible responses. And to decide on my response, I need to make a thoughtful or reasoned judgment, which I do through the application of relevant criteria for that question and appropriate evidence that I gather for that question. So good critical thinking questions invite us to make choices or judgments among options using evidence and criteria to think about it. And very, very quickly, because I want to get to the inquiry again, there are 6 ways we can invite critical thinking. We can invite kids to decode, to make sense of something, so when they decode, they're making sense. I can ask them to critique something, so that would be to assess or review something. I can judge the better or best, where students are asked to compare 2 or more of something. I can ask them to rework something, so change something, given new information or a new focus or perspective, how would it alter it? I could design something, so how would you create a media piece for a particular audience, so that's the design, or perform. Doing a presentation, how will you make sure your audience remains engaged, that the topic, the information is worthwhile, and so on. So those are 6 ways we can engage kids. I want to show you this. I think this is a lovely opportunity that you can use. I'll just type in the window, the chat window. This is from a book called Truax. You can Google Truax and you should find it. It might be connected to the hardwood flooring industry. I mean, the hardwood flooring industry of North America produced this. It's on their website, so when you Google it, it may take you to an odd website. But when you open that website up, you're going to find this children's story called Truax. I want you to think about this. If I ask kids, so Truax is the guy on the left on his knee. He's a logger. By the way, this is written to challenge the Lorax and to challenge the assumptions made by the Lorax from the perspective of, as I said, the logging industry. So they portray Truax as polite and thoughtful, and the guy swooping down in the sky, that's Guardbark, and Guardbark is the environmentalist. It's interesting that he's portrayed with things that look like horns. He's got one squinting eye, a whiskering wheeze, and he's not very patient. In fact, you'll notice on the second page that he says, "I won't take a seat or listen or look," and he snarls as he shook. And you'll notice that all the animals gather around Guardbark, who just cut down the trees they used to live in, but they're still okay with that. They still like Guardbark. Now, I just want to point this out. How would I get kids, what's this got to do with inquiry? Well, this can be a source of kids looking at, they look at the story and they have to find 3 claims made by the story Truax about logging. And they have to decide, and by the way, the crap detector or the baloney meter comes in here, because he is going to make lots of claims, and we can have students look to see the validity of these claims. So for example, notice the claim here that if you examine the scientist rule, you see the planet's clean air and it's cool depend on young trees in tree growing school. That's where they learn how to use CO2. In other words, we need young trees. We should be cutting down trees and planting new ones because they take more CO2 out of the atmosphere. Or you'll notice in the bottom right, biodiversity. Notice what they say about that. That biodiversity, a newly cut forest, I'm on the right bottom, second stanza there, a newly cut forest has sun on the ground and biodiversity leaps and abounds. All kinds of new species move in together, from scales to warts, from furs to feathers. So they're saying, don't worry about cutting trees down. It's not bad for biodiversity, just new animals will move in. So what we want to get kids to do from inquiries, I might use this as a way to have them, and I want to link this back to the 6 prompts, I could ask students now to critique the story and how accurate, judge the better best, which of these two claims made is most problematic, rework the piece, take a page from Truax and rewrite it from the Lorax perspective. How would he respond to that? Figure out the main message would be a decode the puzzle. Right? Design to specs, write your own page to add to the Truax story, perform to specs, share it with your peers in a way that they find engaging and interesting to listen to. So notice I just played with the 6 prompts through the single story. Right? So thinking about 6 ways to engage kids in thinking. I'll show you another example. This one's a bit odd. Is this a powerful advertisement? So let's put, I think we have the link for this one as well, and we'll give you, it's about a 30-second clip, so if you can just take 30 seconds and watch this ad, and then we'll talk about it. Okay, so you've probably had a chance to take a look at it, so any thoughts, first of all? Did you like it? Just 1 or 2 words. Just tell me your reaction to that video. Terrible, gross, liked it. Creepy. Love these words. I have to tell you, in our house, there was quite a debate over this video. My wife and I thought, oh, that's all. We didn't like it at all. Our daughter loved it. I want you to note, if I go back to the 3 types, we've got it out of your head and it's back. I want to just jump back to the 3 types of questions. When you said I liked it, I didn't like it, it's creepy, which type of response are we having? Is that a factual, a type 1, an opinion type 2, or a judgment type 3? Exactly, Heather. That's a type 2 response. I didn't like it, I did like it. But notice if I change the question, did you like it, column 2, but notice if I change the question, is it a powerful ad? That's actually a type 3. And so we began playing with some criteria. Well, is the ad memorable? Is it attention grabbing? Does it have a clear message? Does it have emotional appeal? Now we shift the nature of the question. And by the way, I want you to note, is it, if I ask you, is it memorable? Many people will say absolutely. Whether I like it or don't like it, I'm having trouble. I mean, notice, Pauline, I finally got it out of my head and now it's back because it sticks. It's a memorable commercial. You might not like it, but it sticks. Does it grab attention? I'm guessing from many of your comments, yeah, it was an attention grabbing. Doesn't mean I liked it. Was the message clear? This is where I often have people say that they don't think the message was clear. They think it was a bit unclear. Did it have emotional appeal? Yeah, it gets a strong reaction from love to hate, but it gets a reaction. By the way, notice when I put attention grabbing, we put that, I'll just show this a little more unpacked. Attention grabbing for the intended audience. Who's the audience for that ad? So I'm in my 50s, my wife's in her 50s. Yeah, it's youth. I'm sure Mountain Dew is quite happy that, or not disturbed at all, that I didn't find that ad worked, because I'm not the target audience. They're probably equally happy that my daughter loves the commercial because she's more of the target audience. So getting kids to think about, notice my shift from, do you like this ad, to, is this a powerful ad, shifts the conversation and gets kids having to think about and empathize. Well, who might like this? How would people react? By the way, the clear message one is interesting because many people aren't sure what they're selling. And just to clarify for you, the point of the ad is that if you combine 3 cute things, puppies are cute, babies are cute, and monkeys are cute. So if we had a puppy monkey baby, that would be really cute. But it's interesting how some of you said, no, it was actually creepy and gross. It just looked like a bizarre kind of disturbing creature as opposed to 3 cute things. But their point is that 3 cute things makes a really cute thing. So 3 good things like Mountain Dew, juice, and caffeine will make a great drink. So their point is 3 good things together create something really good. Now, when I said to my daughter, but the message isn't clear, a lot of people don't know what it's about, she said, and that's the charm of the marketing because you want to figure it out and you watch it again to see what was that about. It's got their attention. So it was an interesting perspective. But I wanted to show you there, I've asked you to critique the piece. I've asked you, here's an ad. Using my criteria, critique it. Tell me how effective. But notice if I want to make it a judge the better or best, I could show 2 different ads which one of these should win the award for the most effective ad of the year? Or, Lauren points out that that ad was for use. Okay, so you want to sell the same product, but to a different audience, to a middle-aged audience. What would you change, or how would you redo that commercial so that it attracts a different target audience? That would be a rework the piece. We're here tonight talking about inquiry in Canada and world studies, and next year is our 150th birthday. So imagine if we ask kids as we look through the grade 10 course, I want you to think about as we reflect back on our 150 years, should we be looking back with pride, shame, or a bit of both? Everything we look at in the course, we're going to pause, and you have to decide, does that event go above or below the line? So whatever events we're looking at that are important, kids have to decide. By the way, we would have to build criteria. What criteria would we use for an event that brings pride to Canada? If it doesn't meet it, does it bring shame? What's the criteria? So the students now have to decide, should I put this event way above the line because it significantly contributed? Somewhat above the line, it made a positive but not a huge impact. A bit below the line, it's somewhat of an embarrassment or somewhat negative, or way below the line, this is a national disgrace. Where would you put these variety of events? By the way, notice what I'm doing now is every day that I teach, I don't even have to have a new critical thinking question. I could have this one question up on my wall. I could show a video, assign a reading, do a lecture, and say to kids, pull out the event based on what you've heard today. Do we put it above or below the line and why? Now imagine if I divided my class into groups. I want you to look at it through the lens of First Nations people. Another group's going to look at it through the lens of labor, through women's perspective. So I could use a value line to have kids every day reflect on something they've learned and decide, does it go above or below the line? And by the way, over time, students can now graph our history and take a look at what point in our history did we spend more time above or below the line? Have we been moving in the right direction? We're still making some mistakes, but we're generally doing better than we did in the past, or is it the reverse? Let me know, does that useful? Could you use that in class? Does it make sense? It's good just to get your feedback as we go, but I want to show you that has kids doing a critique every day. Where do we place it on a line in light of evidence and criteria? Okay. By the way, I want you to note that's a simple idea that if you're already doing a timeline with kids, I didn't just significantly alter your lesson. We're still going to do a timeline, but I'm going to build 3 criteria, and each day we'll have a few minutes to decide to go above or below. I increase the depth of thinking. I increase the invitation for kids to explore or wonder about it, but I didn't radically change the lesson. It's not an overhaul for teachers. Okay? So my interest is powerful strategies for kids that aren't killing teachers. So I can take this and use it. Oh, it's great to see that you've actually, can you tell me what grade you're using that with? That'd be wonderful. Here's another that I might use. Absolutely. So as students do their independent inquiry, by the way, I want to tell you, Farron, you're asking about another independent inquiry. And another way, I was just working with grade 5 teachers last week in Alberta. Teachers, they were doing a novel study. I'm trying to remember. The book was Wonder. It's called Wonder. The teacher simply gave kids 25 slips of paper, or 20 slips of paper with a variety of events from the book. The kids had to first put the slips in order so they could just see if they knew the book. And then they had to pick the 10 that they want to put on. And by the way, she used the same line, but it was a novel study. And they had to put the events from the book in order of the book, but they had to also answer for the central character Wonder. Is the event that you picked something that had a positive impact on the character, or did it have a negative impact on the character? And the kids had to pick, so they had to first, out of 20 events from the book that she'd selected, pick the 10 that you think are most important and put those that had a positive impact on top and a negative impact on bottom. But what a lovely way, instead of just reviewing a chapter or chapter details, to have kids use chapter details to look at where in the book positive or negative things are happening. Value line in grade 9 geography. Interesting question. Trying to think. Let's look at some other ones because I'm stumped on that one right now. But this is one in grade 9 geography where you look at sustainability as a central theme, I believe, in that course. And we might ask kids, and by the way, notice what I'm doing. These are up front. I'm going to ask kids, I want you to rank order the top 5 contributors to climate change. And by the way, I throw cow farts in there because kids will have a laugh. They get to say farts. But I've got 6 causes of climate change, all true, but I only have 5 rungs on my ladder. So kids have to decide not only which one would I put on top, but which one would I leave off altogether. Now, I want you to note, when we're doing this, I'm asking kids this day 1, okay? No pre-teaching of content and then test their knowledge. I'm asking kids, what do you think, based on what you've seen in the news, what you've talked about, what you think you know, put these in order. Every day I teach, I'm going to pause and say, does anyone think we need to reorder? Does the new evidence that's emerged cause you to think, you know what, the one I had on top, I think I want to bump down to number 3. You know, the one that we left off, I think it should be actually on the ladder. Okay, if you're bringing it on, which one are you bumping off to take its place? So notice I've embedded an inquiry stance and thinking in every lesson. Even if I'm doing a video or straight up teacher-directed lesson, kids are still having to gather evidence and make a judgment. Oh, interesting. Using the ranking ladder to look at the definition of family. And I assume you're asking what are the key elements of a family, what's the most important for a family? Pauline, maybe you can. Yeah, cool. This one, just getting kids to look at, I'm just showing you different types of the 6 prompts, looking at the dominant perspective, where kids have to figure out what's the text saying, does it have a British or American perspective? They look at this quote, kids will tease out words like the British attacked, they were the aggressors, the Americans were heroic and patriots and they were inspired, and so they can see that has an American slant to it. And then we ask kids, so how might you rewrite this from a British perspective? What would you change? And then we would show kids, and the way we work them through this is we show them the full picture, because this picture has been cropped by the publisher. Here's the full picture, and then having them examine each quarter to draw their attention to detail. We tease out evidence and ask kids to rewrite the caption from a different perspective. So that is getting kids to do what we call as a decode the puzzle, and then a rework the piece. So of the 2 prompts, decode what was said, and then rework, change it. I'm going to give you one more video just for a little bit of fun, just 30 seconds. And if you may remember Gilligan's Island from your child, if not, so it's either a flashback or an introduction to a classic 60s sitcom. And my question for kids, was there a geographer involved in writing the lyrics for the song? Just give a listen and think about what you might do with this to start an inquiry in geography. Okay, so we'll be right back in about 2 minutes after the video. All right, so we're coming up short on time. I want to shift, so just wanted to plant that. Again, we have what we call a decode the puzzle. Kids have to listen carefully to the song. They have to look for clues in the song that hint at geographic issues or themes. And then as they learn geography, as they start to, where might have this been set? If it's a 3-hour tour, where would they be that could get them out that far? Were they actually on a desert island? It didn't look like it. So a number of issues come up that have kids questioning or wondering about the video. So let's move along. I want to throw this piece in that I've been playing with a bit lately in terms of inquiry and how we do what I call moving from fake to real. And what I mean by fake, that's the bottom left corner where we give kids a product or performance for assessment purposes that is, I'm describing it as fake. It's not authentic to real life. It's what schools do, but not much beyond school. But in addition to that, it's fake in terms of who's the audience, like that it's just the teacher or the class. So I give kids a task, they hand it in, the teacher marks it, hands it back. And what I've been playing with is, can we move towards that blue square where kids have more real tasks, authentic tasks, grounded in the world beyond school, but there's also an audience beyond school, that the students are doing something, creating something that is shared beyond the classroom. So you see I've got some examples up top there where students might carry out some kind of historical banquet. They might plan a citizenship project that they implement to make a difference in the world in very real ways. But they might have to, I think a missed opportunity in this country was when Bill Morneau, our finance minister, said there should be more women on Canadian money, and so he appointed a council of 6 Canadians, or a panel of 6 Canadians to decide. To me, that should have been a national school-wide competition for kids to carry out some historical research about a famous woman or women in Canadian history who have made a difference and should be highlighted, and to write a compelling argument to be sent to the government. It would have given kids authentic purpose in the study of history and would have given them an authentic audience. So just thinking about, how do we frame our lessons so that in our assessments, so not only are kids doing tasks that they find more engaging and more authentic, but they're also engaged in being able to share that in ways. Now, it's not going to happen all the time, but I'm looking for when can we increase the authenticity. I have to jump by because of time. I wanted to show you some structures. Some of these we've already touched on, but I call these structures that support thinking. If you want to put inquiry at the core of learning in your classroom, then how can I set up the way kids gather notes, the way they respond to questions, so that they're being invited to continually think about. So let me show you what that might look like, okay? So let's assume that I want kids in the grade 12 course to think about this question: did Napoleon advance or betray the ideals of the French Revolution? I might start by just sharing some images of Napoleon. Who was this guy? What do these images tell us about him? If you know very little about him, looking at the quote, looking at the images, does he look like someone who would advance or betray? And kids are just speculating at this point, okay? And then we would do a lesson on, what are the ideals of the French Revolution? I think we have a 30-second clip. I'll ask you not to listen to all of it, but I think we have a clip for this. We'll just see. Yep, there we go. But don't watch all of it. I'm going to ask you just for shortness of time, just about the first, maybe 45 seconds. Then if you could turn it off and join us again, then I can make my point. Thanks. So I'm hoping people are back. Maybe I can just get a check mark if you are back, so I don't talk over the video. We need to wait just a little longer. Back, okay, yes. So the purpose for me for that video, in 3 minutes, I can get an overview of the French Revolution, and all my students would know what the goals of the French Revolution were, or the criteria we're going to use, and they could sing them back to me. And so that's just a very fast and somewhat fun way for kids just get an introduction overview to the French Revolution. But this is the thinking strategy. So I want you to note what I've done here is taken the criteria. What do you mean? Did he advance or betray? Well, did he support equality, fraternity, or brotherhood, liberty, freedoms? And as we look at a series of events from the outbreak of the French Revolution through to Napoleon's coup d'etat and to the end of the Napoleonic Wars, each group of students, 2 or 3 students, are assigned one topic. They're to come back and share with the class, tell me about the storming of the Bastille as it relates to my 3 criteria. So they have to give us some key points, and students then place it in the cells, and they decide, so does this advance, circle the plus, or undermine, circle the minus, or maybe it's in between. Students then tally it, so the storming of the Bastille, and they might say +2, it's all about the revolution. What about the execution of Marie Antoinette? Maybe that's a +1, maybe it's a -1. What about the crowning of himself emperor? Where does that go? And by the way, if you take the value line I showed you earlier, imagine if kids are taking these events, now placing them on a value line with their score. They could visually step back and see that the revolution was on track until the Reign of Terror, then it actually starts to be betrayed. Perhaps the kids end up arguing Napoleon didn't betray it, but he carried on a betrayal. Perhaps they see that he actually advanced it for a while, but then betrayed it. But by using this decision-making matrix, every day in my class over a week. Kids could be, instead of notes being made in a linear sense, notice the notes are now being made around a set of criteria leading to a decision or judgment of some kind. So that's kind of the key here, is can I set up my classroom so that the way kids even gather evidence and respond to evidence is through an inquiry stance. Now, don't worry about, I know this is English and we're here to talk about Canadian World Studies, but I just wanted to show you the structure. Fate or free will, which contributed more to the deaths of Romeo and Juliet? So again, I give kids a way to respond right off the bat. I give them some criteria. If fate's the dominant factor, then these three criteria would be met. I ask kids, you know we haven't read the play yet, but I just want to know from your experience in life, do you think your life is directed more by fate or free will? Kids set the dial, and they tell me a couple of reasons before we even start the play. I'm told often kids think that well, you tell me, fate or free will, which one? So kids set the dial. As we begin to examine the play and we do all the things we would do to make sure kids can understand, they pause and they say, what does the first act suggest? Does it suggest more fate than free will? Where would you put the dial this time? What evidence do you have? So notice what I'm doing here is using a dashboard to get an initial reaction, and then let's see if your reasoning changes the more you learn, and I want to see the evidence that you use to support this thinking. Okay? We did this, so we can jump by. What I did want to show you with the puppy monkey baby, I showed you the criteria. In this case, we use a fishbone graphic organizer. I want you to note again, from an assessment lens, it's supporting student thinking, kids are going to assess the effectiveness of the ad. They have to decide, is it highly effective, somewhat effective, not very effective, or ineffective. We either co-construct or present criteria that form the boxes. And then students are to gather evidence. Now, I want you to replace this with something you might explore over more time. The Canadian government, fishbone graphic organizer, so it's just a fishbone, because it looks like a fish. Imagine if we asked kids, did the government do enough to respond to the economic crisis and the Great Depression? That's your question. And you, at the end, the tail would be, the government did everything they could. They did high marks. They did adequate. They did poor. The government was disastrous. So we give them four choices. What criteria would we use? So did the government do enough, or was the government effective? We give them some criteria that they made sure that all regions of Canada received support, that the most hard hit were given support, that their actions had a lasting impact and meant that people immediately had their needs met, whatever. We come up with four criteria. As we work through our unit, students are adding short notes on the fishbone. The beauty for you as a teacher is, rather than realizing kids have gathered the information but don't know how to organize it or haven't connected it to the criteria, here, at a glance, I can have a quick look and see, are you aligning the correct evidence to the criteria, which will lead you to a thoughtful decision. And if I look at an overwhelming body of evidence that says the government failed to do enough, and yet I give them, they were pretty good, then your conclusion is inconsistent with your evidence. But what I'm saying to you, this is a way easier way for me to do a quick check to see if students are aligning evidence to the criteria and making a decision in light of evidence and criteria, then down the road in a draft response of some kind. I'm going to show you one other structure, and then I think we're almost out of time. Again, Henry VIII, ideal Renaissance prince or royal scoundrel. So we asked a question like this up front. Notice, remember I said at the beginning, critical inquiry is inviting the students to consider a range of options and to make a decision. So I've given you choice here. Should we see him as the ideal Renaissance prince or more of a royal scoundrel? If he's an ideal Renaissance prince, he needs to meet these criteria: well-versed in the arts, skilled in the art of war, physically adept, excellent social skills and graces, knowledgeable and intelligent. Those are the criteria attributed to a Renaissance prince. Does Henry meet them? Over the next couple of weeks, days, we're going to read about, discuss, learn about Henry VIII, the Henrician Reformation, and so on. Okay. Now, notice here, I've got my same criteria also listed down the side. As I lecture, as you read, you're organizing what you're learning about around the criteria and whether or not it shows evidence that criteria was met or was not met. So this is a way, again, instead of a linear set of notes, kids are thinking as they take the notes. Which criteria do I match this to? Does it show it being met or not met? When I weigh that evidence now, do I have a lot more showing it was met and therefore he very much meets the criteria? Or is that he did not meet the criteria, although he may have had a little bit of evidence, there's more to show that he in fact was not well versed in the arts. Here's my proof, and then here's my judgment. So I'm showing you this as a structure to support inquiry that helps kids take notes in response to a question, in response to a set of criteria, in a way that helps them track and make sense. We saw this one. And one last one, what makes a hero? I call this a thinking map. It's like a mind map, but instead of just at the center we have a topic, instead if you go back to my first slide where I said let's move a topic to an issue, well here I've moved a topic to an issue. So instead of my topic learning about Jack Sparrow, who might replace with Johnny McDonald or whatever, I'm turning it into an issue. Is this character a hero or a villain? Well, how do we decide? Well, if he's a hero, he needs to meet these criteria for a hero. Okay, we gather evidence in those boxes around it, and we make a judgment. Now, if I ask you to write a persuasive paragraph to participate in a debate, our central question will become your thesis. I believe Jack Sparrow, although he had villainous traits, was more heroic than villain. Why? And I start citing, although he could have selfish traits, I think he was more selfless and selfish, and here's my evidence. He does save Elizabeth Swann. He does help his friends in their times of need, whatever it might be. By the way, I'm rushing through this, but I do want to point out, you might wonder why I'm using Jack Sparrow. If I show this to kids, they're both trying to wrap their head around a new thinking strategy that they haven't used before, and they're learning new content. I find it can overwhelm kids. So my advice to teachers often is use a piece of pop culture, use something a bit playful to test out the thinking strategy, do one together with kids. They see how it works. They don't have to worry about whether they're learning the content that they have to learn, because we're just going to try this out with something a bit fun. And then the next day I bring back the same thinking structure, in this case a thinking map, and I ask kids, well, what if we insert it and we put a different character in there? So what if I put in Stephen Harper, effective prime minister or not? What's your criteria for an effective prime minister? We put him in the center and we learn about the Harper years, for example. By the way, side note, Maclean's, I noticed last week, had a list of the 10 most effective prime ministers, long-serving prime ministers, for which they have a nice set of criteria that they show that historians use. So that could be borrowed here. So what I want to show you in this is just as a way to just show a variety of structures that I can organize to support if I ask that good, rich inquiry question, and then I use a variety of these structures that help kids take notes in a way that supports their thinking. Then thinking is present every day in my class. This inquiring mindset is at play every day in my class. And I'm giving kids the tools to organize it and make sense. So I hope that made sense to you. And I've gone over a little bit. And I do know there's a baseball game on. I don't know if any of you are hoping to catch and how it's going. But I hope there were some strategies in there that you found helpful and will be useful. So I'm going to stop there and turn things back to Susan to say goodnight and thanks for your participation. And remember, I believe that Susan mentioned these materials will be available well, she can tell you where she posted them, but you'll be able to access them and perhaps you can use them in your class. Thanks so much. By the way, it's a tie game, 1-1 right now in the baseball game, so we'll go catch the rest. Have a good night, everyone.
Thanks so much, Garfield. This was such a rich presentation, as always. I wish we'd had 112 instead of 12, but because this is the kind of thing that can just, you know, jumpstart a year of critical thinking for teachers. So thank you so very much. And for all of you, thank you for being here tonight. This was a rich presentation with lots of great resources shared. And as we mentioned at the start, these are recorded, and I'm going to turn it off shortly and stop the recording. I'm going to scroll through these slides to get to my first one here. Where are we? There we go. Yeah, I'm going to stop the recording shortly. Thank you, teachers, for attending, and Garfield for presenting. That was amazing. We do need your feedback. I'm going to put a link in the chat to the feedback form. If you want to click on it now, you can, but when you log out of Blackboard Collaborate, you're going to automatically be sent a link to complete the survey. It takes a few minutes, but it's really valuable. It helps to help us make decisions around what content to offer in the second and third terms of this year. It also drives funding for OTF, so it is really important. The other link that's on there is to a resource link. You can click on that now, but it will take you to a page that says it's not active yet. I will be doing that right after the session tonight, and including the recording as well as all of the links to the videos and resources that Garfield mentioned. So I'm going to turn this off, and then I've got a couple more slides to share with you. Good night, everyone.